The Grey Knights are incorruptible. That's what everyone believes. The Emperor's finest demon hunters. Warriors so pure that chaos cannot touch them. Psychic warriors who've never, not once in 10,000 years, fallen to the ruinous powers. Except that's a lie. Not a complete lie. Most Grey Knights resist corruption throughout their entire service. Die fighting demons. Never waver. Never fall. The safeguards work. Usually. But not always. Brother Captain Arvin of the Grey Knights stood in his meditation chamber on Titan, 300 years of loyal service behind him, and realized something that should have been impossible. The demon he'd killed that morning had been right. Not about everything. Not about most things. But about one specific thing, one critique of Imperial doctrine. The demon's words had made perfect sense. More sense than the official explanation Arvin had been taught. More sense than the dogma he'd repeated for 3 centuries. This thought should have triggered immediate alarm. Should have sent him running to the prognosticators for emergency purification. Should have activated every psychological safeguard the Grey Knights had burned into his mind during his transformation. Instead, Arvin thought, what else were they right about? That question was the crack. The moment the incorruptible began corrupting. Not from external force. Not from demonic attack. Not from anything the Grey Knights' defenses were designed to stop. From curiosity. From knowledge. From 300 years of studying chaos so thoroughly that he'd started to understand it. And understanding is the first step toward agreement. 18 months later, Arvin fell. Completely. Consciously. Chose chaos with full knowledge of what he was doing. Became the one thing that's not supposed to exist. A Grey Knight who serves the ruinous powers. The Grey Knights killed him within hours. Erased him from their records. Made sure nobody would ever know it happened. Protocol Terminus. The response to an incident that officially never occurs. But it does occur. Rarely. So rarely the Imperium can maintain the fiction of incorruptibility. So rarely that each incident can be hidden, classified, erased before the truth spreads. Yet rare isn't never. And never is what the Grey Knight's reputation requires. This is what happens when the impossible becomes real. When the incorruptible fall. When the Imperium's ultimate demon hunters become the most dangerous chaos servants imaginable. And why the Imperium will do anything, erase any record, kill any witness, maintain any lie, to ensure you never learn this is possible. If this kind of institutional horror is why you're here, examining what the Imperium hides, hit that like button. The algorithm needs engagement to know there's an audience for uncomfortable truths. Let me show you why Grey Knights are supposed to be incorruptible. And then I'll show you exactly why that's not quite true. If this kind of worst-case scenario analysis is why you're here, the cracks in the Imperium's perfect warriors, hit that like button. The algorithm needs to know there's an audience for content that examines what happens when the safeguards fail. Let me show you why Grey Knights are supposed to be incorruptible. And then I'll show you why that's not quite true. The Grey Knights are not space marines. Not really. Not in the way other chapters are space marines. There's something more. Something purpose-built for a single task. Fighting demons without succumbing to the warp's corruption. Everything about them, from recruitment to training to genetic modification, is designed to create incorruptible demon hunters. Start with recruitment. Grey Knights don't recruit from normal populations. Don't take aspirants from hive worlds or death worlds or anywhere else chapters typically find candidates. They recruit psykers. Specifically, young psykers who've already demonstrated resistance to chaos. Children who've been exposed to the warp through their gifts. Who've felt its touch. Who've survived that contact without corruption. This is the first filter. Most psykers can't resist chaos. The moment they open themselves to the warp, the moment they use their powers, they become vulnerable. Demons notice, whisper, tempt, corrupt. The vast majority fall, get possessed, become daemon hosts, have to be executed before they endanger others. But a tiny percentage resist. Have something inside them, genetic, psychological, spiritual, that rejects chaos even when exposed to it. That can touch the warp without being touched back. These children are identified, taken by the Inquisition, delivered to Titan, given the chance to become Grey Knights. Already, the recruitment pool is extraordinary. These aren't just physically capable children. They're psychically gifted children who've proven they can resist the one thing that corrupts nearly everyone who touches it. That's the foundation. Before any training, before any genetic modification, before any of the Grey Knights' legendary safeguards are applied. Then comes the screening. The prognosticators, Grey Knights who specialize in divination, examine every recruit. Not just their past, their potential, their possible futures, the paths their lives might take, the ways they might fail. They're looking for contamination, for weakness, for the tiniest flaw that might, decades or centuries later, become the crack through which chaos enters. They find it in most candidates. Some subtle vulnerability, some psychological weakness, some moment in a potential future where the recruit might hesitate, might question, might be susceptible. Those candidates are rejected. Not killed, usually, just deemed unsuitable for the Grey Knights. Sent to other branches of the Inquisition. Still valuable psykers. Still capable of serving. Just not incorruptible enough for this specific purpose. The ones who pass. There may be 1 in 100 of the already exceptional children who made it to Titan. The absolute elite. The candidates without any detectable flaw. Then the modification begins. Grey Knights receive the same 19 organ implants as other Space Marines. The secondary heart. The osmodula. The biscopia. All the standard Astartes enhancements that transform children into transhuman warriors. But their gene seed is different. Unique. Created by the Emperor himself during the final days of the Horus Heresy. Designed specifically to resist chaos. To be genetically incompatible with demonic corruption. Nobody knows exactly how it works. The Emperor's personal genetic engineering was beyond even the Mechanicus's understanding. But the result is clear. Grey Knight's biology rejects warp contamination at the cellular level. Normal Space Marines can be corrupted. Their gene seed can be twisted. Their bodies can be warped by chaos. The traitor legions prove this. Grey Knights can't, or shouldn't be able to. Their genetic structure resists alteration, fights against corruption, refuses to be changed by the warp's influence. But genetics is only part of the defense. The real protection is psychological. The conditioning, the training, the absolute, unshakable certainty drilled into every Grey Knight from the moment they're accepted. They don't just learn to fight demons. They learn to hate them, on a level so deep that it becomes part of their identity. Part of how they think. Part of what they are. Demons aren't just enemies. They're abominations. Things that shouldn't exist. Violations of reality itself. Seeing a demon should provoke the same visceral rejection as seeing a corpse crawling with maggots. Disgust so profound that there's no room for curiosity or fascination or understanding. This is reinforced constantly. Every training session, every meditation, every ritual. The message is burned into their minds. Chaos is the enemy. Not just an enemy. The enemy. The only thing that matters. The reason you exist. Normal Space Marines fight for the Emperor. For humanity. For their chapter's honor. For their brothers. For 100 different reasons that give meaning to their service. Grey Knights fight for one reason only. To kill demons. That's it. That's their entire purpose. Their only purpose. This single-minded focus is their psychological defense. How do you corrupt someone who's built their entire identity around hating you? Who can't think about you without experiencing revulsion? Who sees you not as temptation but as disease? You can't. Or you shouldn't be able to. The conditioning is designed to make corruption psychologically impossible. Then there's the psychic defense. Every Grey Knight is a psyker. Has to be. You can't fight demons effectively without psychic powers. Can't perceive their true nature. Can't disrupt their connection to the warp. Can't banish them permanently. But being a psyker means being vulnerable. Means having a connection to the warp that demons can exploit. Means being a beacon that draws chaos's attention. So Grey Knights learn to weaponize that vulnerability. They don't just use psychic powers. They master them. control them with precision that makes other Imperial psykers look like children playing with fire. Their training includes techniques that only Grey Knights know, wards that create psychic barriers around their minds, mantras that reinforce their resistance, rituals that purge contamination before it can take hold. They can literally burn corruption out of their souls, feel the touch of chaos and purge it through willpower and psychic discipline. Not just resist, actively cleanse. This is why Grey Knights can walk through demon-infested hellscapes without falling. Why they can fight in the warp itself. Why they can bind demons with their minds and banish greater demons through sheer psychic force. They're not just resistant to chaos. They're weaponized against it, built specifically to be its natural predators. All of this combines into something unprecedented. A warrior who's genetically resistant to corruption, psychologically conditioned to hate chaos on a fundamental level, psychically trained to purge contamination through willpower alone, recruited from the tiny percentage of psykers who can already resist what corrupts everyone else. Layer after layer of defense, redundancies on top of redundancies, safeguards designed by the Emperor himself and refined over 10,000 years of fighting demons. The result is supposed to be incorruptibility, not just difficulty to corrupt, actual immunity. Grey Knights who cannot fall no matter what they face. And for the most part, it works. 10,000 years of service. Thousands of Grey Knights deployed across the galaxy. Billions of demons fought and killed. The number who've fallen? Officially, 0. Not a single Grey Knight has ever succumbed to chaos. Not one. Perfect record. Absolute incorruptibility. Except, that's the official record. The one the Grey Knights maintain. The one the Inquisition references. The one the Imperium uses to justify sending them into situations that would corrupt anyone else. The unofficial record? The classified one? The records that exist in vaults so secret that most Grey Knights don't know they exist? Those records tell a different story. Not many incidents. Not common. But not 0 either. Grey Knights can fall. It's rare. So rare that each incident is a galaxy-shaking crisis. So rare that the Imperium can pretend it never happens by classifying everything and eliminating all witnesses. But it happens. And when it does, the careful observer can see the cracks in the armor. The vulnerabilities in a system that's supposed to be perfect. Let me show you where those cracks are. How something designed to be impossible becomes merely improbable. The first vulnerability is the one nobody talks about. The one the Grey Knights themselves might not fully recognize. Knowledge. Grey Knights know more about chaos than anyone else in the Imperium. They have to. You can't fight demons effectively without understanding them. Can't counter their tactics without studying their nature. Can't banish them without comprehending the warp's mechanics. So Grey Knights learn everything. The names of greater demons. The hierarchies of the ruinous powers. The rituals chaos cultists use. The symbols. The incantations. The philosophies. All of it. They study what the Inquisition burns. Read texts that would drive normal humans insane. Examine demon anatomy. Analyze chaos theology. Understand the arguments that the ruinous powers use to corrupt mortals. This knowledge is necessary, but it's also dangerous, because to understand something is to begin relating to it, to see its internal logic, to recognize that from a certain perspective it makes sense. The Grey Knight's conditioning is supposed to prevent this. They're trained to view chaos with absolute hatred, to see knowledge as a weapon rather than understanding, to study demons the way a surgeon studies disease, with clinical detachment and the goal of eradication. But hatred and understanding are not opposites. You can hate something and still comprehend why it exists, why it appeals to others, why it has power. And once you comprehend that, once you understand not just what chaos is but why it works, you've taken the first step toward the thing you're supposed to resist. Brother Captain Arvin fell because he understood. That moment on Vortin's gate when the demon's words made sense wasn't corruption overriding his defenses. It was knowledge organizing itself into comprehension. All those years of studying chaos, analyzing its nature, learning how it functions, suddenly clicking into understanding. The Grey Knights give their warriors the tools to fall and then rely on conditioning to prevent them from using those tools. It works, mostly, but conditioning isn't perfect, isn't absolute, and over decades or centuries, the accumulated knowledge starts to exceed the conditioning's ability to contain it. You can't learn everything about something and maintain pure hatred forever. Eventually, understanding breeds familiarity. Familiarity breeds curiosity. Curiosity breeds the question, what if there's more to this than I've been told? That question is the crack. The moment when the safeguards start to fail. The second vulnerability is exposure. Grey Knights fight demons constantly, more than any other organization in the Imperium. They're deployed specifically to the worst demon incursions, the most dangerous warp rifts, the places where chaos bleeds into reality. This is their purpose, what they're built for, but it's also constant exposure to the thing they're supposed to resist. Think about radiation. Small doses, properly shielded, manageable. But constant exposure? Over years? Decades? Centuries? Eventually the shielding degrades. Eventually the radiation gets through. The warp works the same way. Grey Knights have psychic defenses, wards, purification rituals, techniques for cleansing contamination. But they're using these defenses constantly, reinforcing them after every battle, burning out corruption after every exposure. That's exhausting, not physically, psychically, spiritually. Each purification ritual takes effort. Each reinforcement of mental wards requires focus. Each act of burning out contamination is like cauterizing a wound. It removes the infection but leaves scar tissue. And scar tissue is weaker than healthy tissue. Over centuries of service, a Grey Knight accumulates psychic scarring. Places where the defenses have been breached and repaired. Breached and repaired. Again and again. The repairs hold. The wards function. But they're not as strong as they were. Not as flexible. Not as resilient. Eventually, a Grey Knight reaches a point where their defenses are more scar tissue than original structure. Still functional. Still effective. But brittle. Vulnerable to exactly the right kind of stress in exactly the right place. That's when corruption can slip through. Not overwhelming the defenses. Just finding the weakened spot. The place where centuries of accumulated damage have left a gap. The Grey Knights know this. They rotate their warriors. Pull veterans from the most dangerous assignments. Give them time to recover. Reinforce their defenses properly rather than just patching them between battles. But there's never enough time. Never enough warriors. The demon incursions keep coming. The warp rifts keep opening. The Grey Knights are too valuable to bench when they're still functional. So they keep deploying veterans who should be resting. Keep sending them into the worst fights. Keep exposing them to chaos until eventually, inevitably, the accumulated damage creates an opening. The third vulnerability is empathy. Grey Knights are conditioned to hate demons, to see them as abominations, things that violate reality and deserve only destruction. But demons aren't the only servants of chaos. Chaos has human followers, cultists, sorcerers, people who've chosen corruption, who've made pacts with demons, who serve the ruinous powers willingly. Grey Knights kill them too. Have to. Can't allow chaos worshippers to live. Can't risk them spreading corruption. The doctrine is clear. Purge all taint. No exceptions. But these are humans. Not demons. Not alien entities from the warp. Humans. People who were born just like the Grey Knights were. Who had families, childhoods, lives before chaos. And some of them fell not because they were evil, but because they were desperate. Because chaos offered them something they needed. Power to protect their families. Knowledge to cure diseases. Strength to fight oppression. The reasons are always lies. The gifts are always curses. But the people who accepted them were often just trying to survive in a galaxy that's incomprehensibly hostile. Grey Knights see this. Can't help but see it. They read minds. Perceive emotions. Understand the psychological states of their enemies. They know when someone fell to chaos through evil intent and when they fell through desperation. And executing desperate people is harder than executing evil ones. Most Grey Knights handle this through compartmentalization. These people made their choice. Whatever their reasons, they chose chaos. They're corrupted. They're threats. They must die. The reasons don't matter. Only the corruption matters. But some Grey Knights struggle with this. Not openly. Not in ways that affect their performance. But internally, privately, they start asking questions. Why did these people fall? What drove them to chaos? What was missing in the Imperium that chaos provided? What does it say about the Imperium that people choose damnation over Imperial protection? These are dangerous questions. Not heretical necessarily, but dangerous, because they lead to more questions. About the Imperium's failures. About whether the system itself creates the conditions that make chaos appealing. And from there, it's a short step to, what if chaos isn't entirely wrong? What if the ruinous powers exist because the Imperium is so broken that people need an alternative? What if corruption is sometimes the only rational choice in an irrational system? That's the empathy trap. Understanding why people fall. Sympathizing with their desperation. Beginning to see chaos not as pure evil but as an exploiter of legitimate grievances. Once you recognize that chaos succeeds because the Imperium fails, you've opened yourself to the possibility that chaos might have valid critiques. That the warp's corruption might be addressing real problems even if its methods are monstrous. And that possibility is a crack. A vulnerability. A place where chaos can say, you understand. You see the truth. Join us and fix what the Imperium cannot. The fourth vulnerability is curiosity. Grey Knights are recruited from psykers. People with gifts. With abilities that let them perceive and manipulate the warp. That's essential for their role. But it's also a personality type. Psykers are curious. Have to be. Their gifts make them aware of things normal people can't perceive. They see the warp's currents. Feel its patterns. Sense the immaterial realm underlying physical reality. That breeds curiosity. The desire to understand. To explore. To push boundaries. You can't be a powerful psyker without being fascinated by the warp's nature. The Grey Knights suppress this curiosity. Redirect it toward tactical applications. Channel it into studying how to kill demons rather than understanding why demons exist. But suppression isn't elimination. The curiosity remains. Buried. Constrained. But always there. Always asking questions. What would happen if I touched the warp without wards? What would I perceive? What knowledge would I gain? What power could I access if I wasn't constrained by the Imperium's restrictions? Dangerous questions. Questions the conditioning immediately shuts down. Questions a Grey Knight would never act on because the consequences are obvious. But over centuries, over thousands of battles, after decades of seeing the same tactical approaches yield the same limited results. When you know there's power in the warp that you're not accessing because you're holding back, the curiosity starts to overcome the conditioning. Just a little, just enough to think, what if I pushed slightly further? What if I experimented just once? What if I tested my limits in a controlled way? That experimentation is the crack. The moment when curiosity exceeds caution. When the desire to understand overcomes the fear of corruption. And once you start experimenting, once you begin pushing boundaries, you discover something the Grey Knights don't talk about. The warp responds to curiosity, rewards it. Not immediately, not obviously. But a Grey Knight who starts exploring just a bit beyond the approved techniques discovers that their power increases. Their understanding deepens. Their effectiveness improves. This creates a feedback loop. Curiosity yields results. Results encourage more curiosity. More curiosity yields better results. Each step seems justified because it's making you a better warrior. More effective at killing demons. You're not falling to chaos. You're just optimizing your abilities. Using power that was always available. Accessing knowledge that enhances your effectiveness. Except that's exactly how corruption works. It doesn't announce itself. Doesn't wave red flags. Presents itself as improvement, enhancement, optimization. By the time you realize you've been corrupted, you're too deep to pull back. Your power is real. Your effectiveness is genuine. You've become a better Grey Knight through forbidden knowledge. And that makes the fall rational, justifiable, not a failure of discipline but a success of practical adaptation. The fifth vulnerability is isolation. Grey Knights operate separately from other Imperial forces. They're too dangerous to integrate normally. Their knowledge is too sensitive. Their mere existence is classified. So they fight alone, or with other Grey Knights. They don't form bonds with regular humans. Don't integrate into guard regiments. Don't interact with civilians. They arrive, purge the demon threat, and leave. This isolation is protective, keeps their secrets contained, prevents contamination from spreading, ensures that if a Grey Knight does fall, the damage is limited to other Grey Knights who can handle it. But isolation also removes external perspective. When you only interact with other Grey Knights, you only hear Grey Knight perspectives. When everyone you know has the same training, same conditioning, same worldview, there's no one to check your assumptions. You start to normalize things that shouldn't be normal, accept compromises that shouldn't be accepted, justify decisions that shouldn't be justified. A Grey Knight who's starting to fall won't get caught by his brothers because his brothers are seeing the same things he's seeing, fighting the same battles, making the same rationalizations, facing the same pressures. They can't recognize his corruption because they're too close to it themselves, too embedded in the same system, too conditioned by the same training. By the time the fall becomes obvious, by the time the corruption manifests in ways that can't be rationalized, it's too late. The Grey Knight is gone, and his brothers are left wondering how they missed it, how someone they fought beside for centuries could have fallen without them noticing. The answer is, they were too close to see, too isolated from external perspectives that might have caught the warning signs. These are the cracks: knowledge, exposure, empathy, curiosity, isolation. None of them individually sufficient to corrupt a Grey Knight. None of them supposed to matter given the layers of defense. But combined, over centuries, under exactly the right circumstances, they create vulnerabilities, openings, places where corruption can enter not by overwhelming the defenses but by bypassing them entirely. The Grey Knight safeguards are designed to resist direct corruption, the kind where a demon attacks your mind, where chaos offers obvious temptation, where the threat is external and identifiable. But these vulnerabilities are internal, subtle. They develop slowly, present themselves as reasonable thoughts rather than corrupting influences, make falling seem like progress rather than failure. And when a Grey Knight finally falls through these cracks, when the corruption manifests after years or decades of slow compromise, the response is immediate. Because a fallen Grey Knight isn't just dangerous. He's apocalyptic, and the Imperium knows exactly what has to be done. Let me show you what happens next. The moment Brother Captain Arvin was discovered in his meditation chamber, changed, the Grey Knights on Titan enacted Protocol Terminus. Not a formal protocol, not something written in any codex, just an understanding, a set of actions that every Grey Knight knows without being taught. What you do when the impossible happens. First, isolation. Absolute. Immediate. The entire section of the fortress monastery containing Arvin's chamber was sealed. Psychic wards activated at maximum strength. Physical barriers locked. Every entrance guarded by paladins, the Grey Knights' absolute best. Nobody in, nobody out. Not even other Grey Knights unless specifically authorized. The contamination had to be contained before anything else could be done. Second, notification. But only to specific people. The Grand Master of the Grey Knights, the chapter's prognosticators, the purifier squads, the chaplains who specialized in identifying corruption. Nobody else. Not the Inquisition, not other Space Marine chapters, not the High Lords of Terra. Not yet, maybe not ever, because the first priority wasn't stopping Arvin. He was already contained. The first priority was deciding whether this incident would be recorded in history or erased from it. Third, assessment. Determining exactly how bad this was, how far the corruption had spread, whether Arvin had contaminated anyone else, whether his fall was isolated or symptomatic of a larger problem. The prognosticators entered the sealed section, not physically, psychically, projecting their consciousness toward Arvin's chamber while keeping their bodies safely distant, reading his psychic signature, analyzing his aura, understanding what he'd become. What they found was worse than expected. Arvin wasn't possessed, wasn't a demon host, wasn't raving or obviously corrupted. He was still rational, still intelligent, still himself in most ways that mattered. But he'd changed allegiance, consciously, deliberately, with full understanding of what he was doing. He hadn't been overcome by chaos. He'd chosen it. That made him far more dangerous than a possessed Grey Knight would have been. Possession could be fought, could be banished, could be treated as enemy action rather than personal failure. This was betrayal, apostasy. A Grey Knight who'd looked at everything he'd been taught and decided it was wrong, who'd studied both sides and chosen chaos. The prognosticators withdrew, reported their findings, and the Grand Master made the only decision possible. Arvin had to die. Immediately, completely, with certainty. But killing a Grey Knight isn't simple. They're designed to be nearly impossible to kill. Transhuman physiology, power armor, psychic defenses, combat training that makes them superior to almost any opponent. And Arvin was a brother captain, one of the absolute best. You couldn't just send a squad. Arvin would kill them, even corrupted, especially corrupted, if he was willing to use powers the Grey Knights normally constrained. He was too dangerous for anything less than overwhelming force. So they sent the Purifiers, an entire squad, 8 Grey Knights who specialized in cleansing corruption, who were even more resistant to chaos than normal Grey Knights, who existed specifically for situations like this. And they sent a chaplain, to witness, to ensure the purge was thorough, to provide spiritual authority for what was about to happen. And they sent a librarian, to counter Arvin's psychic abilities, to ensure he couldn't escape through warp teleportation or psychic manipulation. 11 Grey Knights total, against one of their own. That's how dangerous a fallen Grey Knight is. They entered the sealed section, found Arvin waiting, still in his meditation chamber. He hadn't tried to escape, hadn't tried to hide, just waited. He knew what was coming, expected it, maybe wanted it. The corruption hadn't made him delusional. He understood that the Grey Knights would kill him, that they had no choice, that his fall couldn't be tolerated. He just didn't care anymore. The fight lasted 6 minutes. Arvin was a brother captain, had fought for 3 centuries, knew every Grey Knight combat technique, understood their tactics, could predict their moves, and he was using powers they wouldn't use, drawing on the warp without restraint, channeling energies that normal Grey Knights kept carefully contained, fighting with the full strength that corruption unlocks when you abandon the Imperium's restrictions. He killed 2 Purifiers, wounded 3 more, forced the librarian to exhaust himself maintaining psychic containment, pushed the entire strike team to their absolute limits. But there were 11 of them and 1 of him, and they were willing to die to stop him, were willing to sacrifice themselves if that's what it took to ensure a fallen Grey Knight didn't escape. Eventually, the chaplain landed the killing blow, a blessed blade through Arvin's primary heart, then his secondary heart, then his skull, making absolutely certain he was dead and staying dead. They burned the body, completely, reduced it to ash, collected the ash and sealed it in a consecrated container. Didn't bury it, didn't scatter it, just stored it in the deepest vault on Titan where it could be monitored for any sign of lingering corruption. His gene seed was destroyed, not harvested, not preserved for the next generation. Destroyed, because they couldn't risk that the corruption had contaminated it at the genetic level. His armor was dismantled, every piece examined, every system purged. Most of it was destroyed too. Only the components that showed absolutely no taint were salvaged. His weapons were melted down, his personal effects burned. Every record of his service was examined for signs that the corruption had existed before his discovery. Every mission he'd fought was reviewed. Every report he'd filed was analyzed. They were looking for contamination, for evidence that he'd spread his fall to others, for any indication that this wasn't an isolated incident. What they found was worse than nothing. No evidence of contamination. No signs he'd corrupted others. No indication of external influence. No demon pact. No chaos cult. No ritual that had triggered his fall. He'd just fallen. On his own. Through the accumulation of small compromises over 18 months. Through knowledge and exposure and curiosity and empathy and all the subtle vulnerabilities that the safeguards were supposed to prevent. The system had failed. Not been overcome. Not been bypassed by some clever demon. Just failed. A Grey Knight had fallen through nothing more than time and exposure and the slow erosion of defenses that were supposed to be absolute. That was the nightmare. Not that Arvin had fallen, but that he'd fallen without any external cause. That it could happen again. That any Grey Knight, given enough time and the right circumstances, might follow the same path. The Grey Knights made a decision. This incident would not be recorded, would not be added to the official histories, would not be taught as a lesson learned, would not be acknowledged in any way. Brother Captain Arvin had died in battle, killed by a greater demon during the purge of Vortin's Gate, honored as a martyr, his name added to the list of fallen heroes. The truth would be sealed, known only to the Grand Master, the prognosticators, the chaplains, and the purifiers who'd killed him. Fewer than 30 Grey Knights total. And they would never speak of it. Not to protect the chapter's reputation, though that mattered. Not to avoid difficult questions, though those would come. But because acknowledging that a Grey Knight had fallen would give chaos a victory. Would prove that the Grey Knight's incorruptibility was a lie. Would undermine the psychological defense that kept other Grey Knights fighting despite impossible odds. If one Grey Knight could fall, others might question whether they could too. Might wonder whether their own defenses were sufficient. Might start looking for the cracks. And looking for cracks is how you find them. But the purifiers had to be dealt with. Not killed. The Grey Knights don't execute their own for knowing too much. But they couldn't be allowed to spread what they'd seen. Couldn't be deployed normally anymore. Couldn't risk them mentioning Arvin's fall during a mission or in front of other chapters. So they were reassigned, permanently, to duties that kept them on Titan, training new recruits, guarding the fortress monastery, maintaining the archives, important roles, honorable roles, but roles that didn't involve interacting with the wider Imperium. The librarian who'd helped contain Arvin was mind-wiped. Not completely, not turned into a servitor, but his memories of that specific incident were removed, carefully, surgically, leaving everything else intact. He remembered that Brother Captain Arvin had died. Just not how. Just not why. The memory was replaced with the official story. Killed by a greater demon. Heroic sacrifice. Nothing unusual. The chaplain who'd witnessed the fall retained his memories. Chaplains need to remember. Need to know the signs. Need to be able to identify corruption if it appears again. He became the keeper of the secret, the one who would watch for similar patterns in other Grey Knights, and he would watch for the rest of his service, centuries potentially, looking for the warning signs, the subtle changes, the slow accumulation of compromises that had consumed Arvin. The witnesses outside the Grey Knights were handled differently. Brother Matthias, the Grey Knight who'd first reported concerns about Arvin, was reassigned to a long-term deep space mission, decades away from Titan, fighting demon incursions in the galactic fringe. Far from anyone who might ask questions about what happened to the captain he'd reported. The other members of Arvin's squad were scattered, reassigned to different brotherhoods, different missions, separated so they couldn't compare notes or discuss what they might have seen. Individually, none of them knew enough to piece together the truth. Collectively, they might have, so they were prevented from being collective. And the two purifiers who died fighting Arvin? Their deaths were attributed to the same demon that officially killed Arvin. Heroic sacrifice. Fighting together. Dying together. The truth wrapped in layers of plausible fiction. This is protocol terminus. Not written anywhere. Not officially taught. Just understood. What you do when a Grey Knight falls. How you contain the damage. How you prevent the truth from spreading. How you ensure that an incident that should be impossible remains officially impossible. Because acknowledging it would be worse than hiding it. Would undermine the Grey Knight's entire purpose. Would give chaos a propaganda victory worth more than 1,000 corrupted worlds. So it never happened. Brother Captain Arvin never fell. Never showed that the incorruptible could be corrupted. Never proved that the safeguards could fail. He just died. Heroically. Defending humanity. Exactly as a Grey Knight should. And the Imperium continues believing that Grey Knights cannot fall. That they're perfect. Incorruptible. Immune to chaos's temptations. Because believing the lie is safer than confronting the truth. But here's the question nobody asks. The one the Grey Knights don't want to confront. What if Arvin wasn't the first? What if this has happened before? What if protocol terminus exists because it's been used? How many times? How many Grey Knights have fallen in 10,000 years? How many times has this happened and been erased from history? We don't know. Can't know. The records don't exist. The witnesses are silenced. The truth is buried under layers of classification and ritual purging. But the Grey Knights have been fighting for 10 millennia. Thousands of warriors. Billions of demon encounters. Infinite exposure to chaos. The statistical probability that Arvin was the only one to ever fall approaches zero. The safeguards are good. But nothing is perfect. Over 10,000 years, with enough trials, even improbable events become inevitable. So protocol terminus probably isn't new. Probably isn't even rare. Just so secret that each generation of Grey Knights thinks they're dealing with the first incident when they're really dealing with the latest. And each time it happens, each time a Grey Knight falls and the truth is suppressed, the problem gets slightly worse. Because you can't fix a flaw you won't acknowledge exists. The cracks remain. The vulnerabilities persist. And the next Grey Knight who falls will fall for the same reasons, following the same path, creating the same crisis. That's the real horror. Not that Grey Knights can fall, but that the Imperium would rather keep sacrificing them to preventable corruption than admit the system needs reform. Because reform would mean admitting imperfection. And imperfection in the Grey Knights would undermine faith in the entire Imperial system. So the lie continues. The fallen are erased. The truth is hidden. And the Grey Knights keep fighting, keep dying, keep occasionally falling, without ever learning from the mistakes that killed their brothers. But let's talk about what a fallen Grey Knight actually becomes. Because that's where the real nightmare lives. Not in the fall itself, but in what emerges afterward. Imagine a chaos sorcerer, one of the 1,000 Sons, maybe, a warrior who spent 10,000 years mastering warp manipulation, who knows rituals that can tear reality, who commands demons, who's been corrupted so long that he's more warp entity than human. Dangerous. Extremely dangerous. The kind of threat that requires multiple Space Marine squads or an inquisitorial kill team to eliminate. Now imagine someone with all that power, all that knowledge, all that warp mastery, but with Grey Knight training, Grey Knight discipline, Grey Knight combat skills, and crucially, Grey Knight knowledge of Imperial defenses. That's what a fallen Grey Knight becomes. Not just a chaos servant. A chaos servant who knows exactly how the Imperium fights chaos. Who understands every defense, every protocol, every weakness. Start with the knowledge. Grey Knights study demons more thoroughly than anyone in the Imperium. They know the true names of greater demons. Understand the hierarchies of the ruinous powers. Can identify demon princes, greater demons, lesser demons, demon engines, all of it. This knowledge is normally used for destruction. You learn a demon's true name to banish it. You understand the hierarchy to disrupt demon armies. You identify different types to choose the right weapons and tactics. But that same knowledge can be used for summoning, for binding, for making pacts. A fallen Grey Knight knows more true names than most chaos sorcerers will learn in their entire corrupted existence. Knows exactly which demons respond to which rituals. knows how to bargain from a position of strength rather than desperation. A normal cultist who tries to summon a demon is gambling, hoping the ritual works, hoping the demon that answers is something he can control, hoping the price demanded is something he can pay. A fallen Grey Knight knows which demon will answer, knows exactly what it wants, knows how to structure the bargain so he gets power without losing his soul in the first transaction. He can build a demon army faster than any other Chaos servant, more efficiently, with more powerful entities, because he's not learning through trial and error. He's applying decades or centuries of Grey Knight training toward opposite purposes. Then there's the psychic power. Grey Knights are among the most powerful psykers in the Imperium. They have to be. Fighting demons psychically requires enormous power. Banishing greater demons requires strength that would make normal librarians burn out. But that power is constrained. Carefully, deliberately, Grey Knights use their abilities within strict limits. They draw only as much as they need. They never push beyond safe boundaries. They maintain control at all costs. A fallen Grey Knight abandons those constraints, stops holding back, draws on the warp without restriction, channels power that would have corrupted him before his fall, but that he can now use freely because he's already corrupted. The result is a psyker operating at levels that rival chaos sorcerers who've been empowered for millennia, but with better training, better discipline, better understanding of psychic mechanics. He's not just throwing raw power around. He's applying it surgically, precisely, using Grey Knight techniques enhanced by unlimited warp access. He can do things that normal psykers can't even conceptualize because he has the training to shape power that others can only channel chaotically. The combat skills make it worse. A Grey Knight is a transhuman warrior, enhanced beyond normal space marine capabilities, trained to fight demons in close combat, equipped with weapons specifically designed to kill entities that are hard to kill. That doesn't go away when he falls. The training remains. The reflexes remain. The centuries of combat experience remain. He's still one of the finest warriors in the galaxy. But now he's fighting for chaos, using those skills against the Imperium, against his former brothers, against everyone who trained him and equipped him and trusted him. He knows Imperial tactics, knows how space marines fight, knows how the Inquisition operates, knows how Imperial forces respond to demon incursions, knows the weaknesses because he spent his entire existence exploiting those same weaknesses when hunting Chaos servants. A fallen Grey Knight doesn't fight like a typical Chaos champion, doesn't rely on demonic possession or mutations or warp-enhanced strength. He fights like a Grey Knight, with precision, with discipline, with tactical superiority, except he's now using demon allies, employing warp powers without restriction, striking at weaknesses in Imperial defenses that he helped create. It's asymmetrical warfare at its worst. An opponent who understands your capabilities better than you do, who knows every trick you might use because he invented half of them, who can counter your strategies before you even implement them. Then there's the equipment. A fallen Grey Knight doesn't lose his gear when he turns. Not immediately. Not unless he's killed quickly like Arvin was. If he escapes, if he manages to flee before Protocol Terminus eliminates him, he takes his equipment with him. Grey Knight weapons are relics. Nemesis force weapons. Psychically attuned blades that can kill demons permanently. Storm bolters loaded with blessed ammunition. Armor inscribed with wards and prayers. All of it designed to fight chaos. All of it more effective against demons than almost any other weapon in the Imperium. And now it's in Chaos's hands, being used by someone who knows exactly how effective it is, who can turn those demon-killing weapons against Imperial forces, who can use wards designed to repel chaos as protection while summoning demons. The corruption doesn't instantly destroy the equipment. Grey Knight wargear is built to resist chaos. The wards don't just shut off because the wielder fell. They keep functioning, keep providing protection, keep making the weapons effective. Eventually, the corruption will warp them, twist the blessings into curses, turn the wards into invitations. But that takes time. And in the meantime, A fallen Grey Knight is fighting with the Imperium's best anti-demon equipment while serving chaos. The strategic knowledge is perhaps the worst part. Grey Knights know where the Imperium is vulnerable, which sectors have weak demon defenses, which forge worlds produce the psyker-detecting equipment, which Inquisitors specialize in hunting chaos cults, which Space Marine chapters respond to demon incursions and how quickly. They know Imperial deployments, response times, resource allocation, the entire strategic framework the Imperium uses to fight chaos. A fallen Grey Knight can provide all of this to the ruinous powers, can identify targets that are vulnerable, can warn chaos forces when Imperial responses are coming, can sabotage defenses before attacks even begin. He becomes an intelligence asset, a strategic advisor, someone who can tell a chaos invasion exactly where to strike for maximum effect and minimum resistance. This isn't theoretical. This is what happens when someone with complete knowledge of Imperial anti-chaos operations switches sides. Every secret becomes a weapon. Every defense becomes a vulnerability because he knows how to bypass it. A fallen Grey Knight also becomes a symbol. The Grey Knights are the Imperium's proof that chaos can be resisted, that humanity has warriors who cannot be corrupted, that there exists a force in the galaxy that chaos cannot overcome. When a Grey Knight falls, that proof dies. The symbol breaks. The message becomes, even the incorruptible can be corrupted. Even the Emperor's finest demon hunters can turn. Even the warriors specifically designed to resist chaos can fall. That's psychological warfare against every Imperial soldier who believed the Grey Knights were invincible, against every citizen who took comfort in knowing that somewhere, someone was completely immune to chaos's temptations. A fallen Grey Knight proves that immunity is a lie, that corruption is always possible, that nobody, no matter how enhanced or trained or faithful, is truly safe. This breaks morale, undermines faith, makes people question whether resistance is even possible if the Grey Knights themselves can fall. Chaos understands this, would use a fallen Grey Knight as propaganda, would parade him before Imperial forces, would have him demonstrate his power, would make sure everyone knew that a Grey Knight had chosen chaos over the Emperor. The damage to Imperial morale would be catastrophic, worth more than a dozen conquered worlds, worth more than any military victory, because it would make billions of people doubt the one thing they thought was certain. There's also the question of what powers a fallen Grey Knight might access. Grey Knights resist chaos while fighting it. That resistance limits what they can do. They can't fully channel the warp's power because doing so would corrupt them. They can't access certain psychic abilities because those abilities require surrendering to emotions the Grey Knights suppress. A fallen Grey Knight removes those limits, stops resisting, opens himself completely to the warp's influence, embraces the emotions, rage, despair, ambition, excess, that the Grey Knights are conditioned to deny. The result is exponential power increase. Not just because he's channeling more power, but because he's using abilities that were previously forbidden. Techniques that the Grey Knights know about but never employ because they're too corrupting. Demonic possession becomes possible. Not against his will, deliberately. A Grey Knight who willingly bonds with a demon creates a hybrid entity. The demon's power combined with the Grey Knight's training and knowledge. The worst of both. Demon weapons become usable. Grey Knights know how demon weapons work. Know which demons are bound into which weapons. Know the techniques for wielding them without being consumed. Now imagine a fallen Grey Knight using that knowledge to control demon weapons that would drive normal Chaos champions insane. Warp rifts become tools. Grey Knights know how to seal warp rifts. That same knowledge, reversed, tells them how to open rifts. How to destabilize the barrier between materium and immaterium. How to create demonic incursions in places the Imperium thought were secure. Let me give you a specific scenario to illustrate the threat. A fallen Grey Knight decides to attack a forge world. Not with armies, not with fleets, just himself and whatever demons he can summon. He knows the forge world's defenses, knows which bastions have anti-demon wards, knows where the Mechanica stations their Scutarii, knows the response time for Titan deployment if the Grey Knights are summoned. He summons demons in the one location the Forge world left vulnerable because they thought it was protected by standard wards. The wards that Grey Knights helped design and that he knows how to circumvent. The demons appear inside the Forge world's manufactorums. Start destroying production facilities. The Mechanicus responds, but slowly, because the attack came from an unexpected direction. The fallen Grey Knight uses his knowledge of Imperial Vox protocols to disrupt communications. Prevents the Forge world from calling for help. Buys himself hours before reinforcements can arrive. He targets the Forge world's psyker detection equipment specifically. Knows which buildings house it. Knows which systems matter. Destroys the Imperium's ability to track his movements through the complex. When the Skitarii finally corner him, he fights with Grey Knight tactics. Discipline. Precision. Enhanced by chaos powers he's no longer restraining. He kills hundreds before extracting through a warp rift. He opens specifically where he knows the Mechanicus doesn't have anti-teleportation wards. The Forge world is crippled. Months or years of production lost. Dozens of critical facilities destroyed. And the Imperium never even knew it was a fallen Grey Knight because he didn't leave witnesses who could identify him. This is what a fallen Grey Knight becomes. An apocalyptic threat. Someone with the knowledge to strike where it hurts most. The power to overcome defenses designed to stop anyone less capable. The training to survive encounters that would kill normal Chaos servants. One fallen Grey Knight operating alone could cause damage equivalent to a full-scale Chaos invasion. Not through brute force, through precision, through exploiting weaknesses only he knows exist, through being exactly the right kind of threat at exactly the right time in exactly the right place. And if he's not alone, if he corrupts other Grey Knights, if he builds a warband from fallen brothers who share his knowledge, that's not just apocalyptic. That's potentially extinction level. A force that understands the Imperium's anti-chaos defenses better than the Imperium does. That can dismantle those defenses systematically. That can corrupt the one organization designed to be incorruptible. The Imperium knows this. Understands the threat. That's why Protocol Terminus exists. Why fallen Grey Knights are killed immediately. Why witnesses are silenced. Why the truth is buried. Because acknowledging the threat would be almost as bad as the threat itself. Would require explaining to the wider Imperium exactly how dangerous a fallen Grey Knight is. Would require revealing capabilities that the Grey Knights keep secret. Would require admitting that the incorruptible can become the most dangerous Chaos servants imaginable. So they hide it, erase it, pretend it never happens. And pray that it happens rarely enough that the response protocol is sufficient to contain the damage before the wider Imperium realizes what's going on. But here's the final question. The one that keeps the Grey Knights' leadership awake. The one that probably motivated the creation of Protocol Terminus in the first place. What if one escapes? What if a fallen Grey Knight evades elimination? What if he survives long enough to reach the Eye of Terror or the Maelstrom or any other Chaos-held region where the Imperium can't easily pursue? What happens then? That's the nightmare that won't end. There's a vault on Titan, deep in the Grey Knight's fortress monastery, behind doors that only the Grand Master and the most senior prognosticators can open. Inside are records, not many, perhaps 30, perhaps 50. Each one documenting an incident that officially never happened. Each one describing a Grey Knight who officially never fell. The names are there. The dates. The circumstances. The signs that were missed. The vulnerabilities that were exploited. The mistakes that were made. Everything needed to learn from these failures and prevent future ones. Except the knowledge stays in the vault. Never taught. Never disseminated. Never used to improve training or refine the safeguards. Just stored, sealed, hidden from everyone except the handful of people who already know the truth. Why? Because the alternative is worse than ignorance. Because confronting the truth would undermine the entire foundation the Grey Knights are built on. Because admitting that Grey Knights can fall would destroy something more valuable than any individual warrior's life. Faith. The Imperium runs on faith. Not just religious faith in the Emperor. Faith that the system works, that the institutions are reliable, that the warriors protecting humanity are actually capable of protecting humanity. The Grey Knights are a keystone in that faith structure. They're the proof that chaos can be resisted, that corruption isn't inevitable, that humanity has defenders who cannot be turned. Every Imperial citizen who knows about the Grey Knights, and not many do, believes they're incorruptible. Every Space Marine chapter that fights alongside them believes they cannot fall. Every Inquisitor who calls for their aid believes they're absolutely trustworthy. This belief matters, not just psychologically, operationally. The Grey Knights are deployed to situations where any corruption would be catastrophic, where a turned warrior could doom entire systems, where absolute trust is mandatory. If people believed Grey Knights could fall, they'd hesitate to deploy them, would question their judgment, would require oversight and verification that would slow response times and reduce effectiveness. The Grey Knights need to be trusted completely, and complete trust requires the belief that corruption is impossible. Not unlikely, impossible. So the Imperium maintains that belief, through institutional denial, through classification, through the systematic erasure of any evidence that contradicts the official narrative. This isn't unique to the Grey Knights. The Imperium does this everywhere, denies inconvenient truths, rewrites history, makes uncomfortable facts disappear into classified vaults where nobody can reference them. But with the Grey Knights, the stakes are higher, because they're not just another military asset. They're a psychological defense, a symbol that gives hope to populations drowning in despair. In a galaxy where chaos corrupts Imperial governors, where cultists hide in every hive, where demons breach into real space regularly, the Grey Knights are the one absolute, the one force that chaos cannot turn, the one organization that will never betray humanity no matter what. Remove that certainty and you remove a critical pillar of Imperial morale. People start asking, if even the Grey Knights can fall, who can we trust? If the warriors designed to be incorruptible aren't, what chance do the rest of us have? Those questions lead to despair, and despair leads to chaos. People who believe resistance is futile stop resisting. Start listening to the whispers that promise power and freedom and solutions the Imperium can't provide. So the Grey Knights must remain incorruptible, not just in fact, in belief. Even when the fact is a lie, the belief must persist because the alternative is worse. The institutional terror is real. When a Grey Knight falls, the immediate fear isn't what the fallen warrior might do. It's what the revelation might cause. What happens if word spreads? If other chapters learn? If the Inquisition discovers the pattern? If the general Imperial population realizes that incorruptibility is a myth? The Grey Knights' leadership understands this terror, lives with it, knows that every fallen brother is a potential disaster not just militarily but politically and psychologically. So they eliminate the evidence, not just the fallen warrior, everything connected to the incident, records, witnesses, physical evidence, anything that could prove the fall happened. This goes beyond normal Imperial classification. Normal secrets are just hidden, restricted access, high clearance required, but still accessible to people with sufficient authority. Fallen Grey Knights are erased, removed from history entirely, not classified as restricted information, just deleted, as if they never existed, as if the incident never happened, as if reality can be rewritten through sufficient institutional will. And it works, because the Grey Knights control access to their own records, because they operate independently of most Imperial oversight, because they have the authority to classify whatever they want and the power to enforce that classification. Nobody questions them. Nobody demands proof of their perfect record. Nobody audits their casualty reports to check if any deaths seem suspicious. The Grey Knights say they've never had a brother fall to chaos, and everyone believes them because the alternative is unthinkable. But the terror goes deeper than just protecting reputation. The Grey Knights know something the wider Imperium doesn't fully grasp. They understand chaos at a level that even the Inquisition rarely achieves. They've studied it, fought it, lived with the knowledge for 10,000 years. And they know this Corruption spreads through knowledge. Not just through action. Not through rituals or pacts or demonic possession. Through simply knowing that corruption is possible. The thought, "I could fall," is itself a vulnerability. Opens a mental door that was previously closed. Creates space for doubt and curiosity and the exploration that leads to actual falling. A Grey Knight who believes he's incorruptible is more incorruptible than one who knows he could fall. The certainty is protective. The absolute faith in the safeguards is part of what makes the safeguards work. If Grey Knights knew their brothers had fallen before, if they understood that the defenses can fail, they'd start watching for the failure. Monitoring themselves. Looking for cracks. And looking for cracks is how you find them. Self-examination creates vulnerability. The more you question whether you're corrupted, the more you open yourself to corruption. It's a psychological trap. The act of vigilance against falling makes falling more likely. So the Grey Knights don't tell their warriors about previous falls. Don't teach the warning signs. Don't explain the vulnerabilities. Keep each generation believing they're the first to face these challenges. That the safeguards are perfect. That corruption is impossible. It's a calculated risk. Accept that some Grey Knights will fall through ignorance of the dangers. But prevent more from falling through fear of those same dangers. The vault on Titan holds lessons that could save lives. But teaching those lessons would endanger more lives than they'd save. So the knowledge stays locked. Known only to the few who must know. Hidden from everyone else. The Inquisition is complicit in this denial. Not officially. Not through policy. But through practical understanding of how the Imperium functions. Some Inquisitors know the truth. Have seen evidence. Have encountered situations where the only explanation is that a Grey Knight fell. Have access to reports that reference incidents that officially never happened. They don't pursue it. Don't investigate. Don't demand answers or threaten to expose the lie. Because they understand the same logic the Grey Knights do. The Imperium needs the Grey Knights to be incorruptible. Needs that certainty more than it needs truth. Needs the symbol more than it needs accurate historical records. An Inquisitor who exposed a fallen Grey Knight would damage the Imperium's anti-chaos defenses more than the fallen Grey Knight himself. Would create doubt. Undermine trust. Make future deployments of Grey Knights less effective because people would hesitate to trust them completely. So the Inquisitors who know stay silent. File their reports in personal vaults. Keep the knowledge to themselves. Participate in the institutional denial because maintaining the lie serves humanity better than exposing the truth. This creates a strange conspiracy. Not coordinated. Not directed by any central authority. Just a collection of individuals across different organizations who've all independently decided that some truths are too dangerous to speak. They protect the lie. Actively. Deliberately. Not out of corruption or cowardice. But out of the sincere belief that the lie is necessary for Imperial survival. But denial has costs. Every fallen Grey Knight who's erased from history is a lesson that can't be taught. Mistakes that can't be learned from. Warning signs that the next generation won't recognize because nobody told them what to watch for. The Grey Knights keep making the same errors. Keep losing brothers to the same vulnerabilities. Keep facing the same crises because they refuse to acknowledge the pattern. They know this. The Grand Master and the prognosticators who maintain the vault understand that they're choosing ignorance over education. That they could prevent some falls by teaching the lessons from previous falls. But they've decided the trade-off is worth it. Better to lose a few brothers to preventable corruption than to lose the faith that keeps the rest of the chapter functional. It's a cold calculation. A brutal one. But the Imperium runs on brutal calculations. Sacrificing a few to save many is standard operating procedure. This is just an unusual variant. Sacrifice knowledge to preserve faith. Accept preventable tragedies to avoid psychological collapse. Let some brothers fall so that others never doubt. There's also the question of what happens if the truth spreads. Not just to the Inquisition or other Space Marine chapters. To the general Imperial population. To the billions of citizens who live under constant threat of chaos corruption. To the people who need to believe someone out there is absolutely trustworthy. If they learned Grey Knights could fall, the psychological impact would be catastrophic. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually. A slow erosion of hope. A creeping certainty that nobody is safe. That corruption is inevitable for everyone eventually. This would feed chaos directly. Despair empowers the warp. Hopelessness creates vulnerabilities. People who believe resistance is futile are easier to corrupt because they've already accepted that corruption is inevitable. The Grey Knights understand this. Know that their role isn't just military. It's psychological. They're a bulwark against despair as much as they're a weapon against demons. So they maintain the perfect record, the unblemished reputation, the absolute certainty that they've never fallen and never will. Because populations need to believe it, need that hope. Need that proof that corruption isn't inevitable. Even if the proof is a lie. Even if the cost is denying reality. Even if it means sacrificing truth for morale. The Imperium has decided the sacrifice is acceptable. Has institutionalized the denial. Has made Grey Knights are incorruptible an article of faith rather than a verified fact. And faith, unlike fact, doesn't require evidence. Just belief. Just the collective agreement that this is true regardless of what actually happened. Just the institutional will to make the lie more real than the truth through sheer repetition. So the vault on Titan stays sealed. The records stay hidden. The fallen brothers stay erased from history. And the Grey Knights remain, officially, incorruptible. Not because they actually are, but because the Imperium needs them to be. Needs the symbol. Needs the certainty. Needs the lie. And everyone with the power to expose that lie has independently decided that some truths are too dangerous to tell. That humanity is better served by comfortable fiction than uncomfortable reality. That maintaining hope through deception is more valuable than maintaining accuracy through honesty. Brother Captain Arvin fell. Died. Was erased. Nobody outside a handful of Grey Knights knows it happened. Nobody ever will. He's recorded as a hero. Killed by a greater demon. Died serving the Emperor. The truth died with him. Sealed in that vault. Hidden behind doors that won't open for anyone who might actually use the knowledge. Preserved only for record-keeping purposes. Evidence of a problem that officially doesn't exist. And somewhere in the galaxy, another Grey Knight is following the same path Arvin followed. Accumulating the same compromises. Developing the same vulnerabilities. Heading toward the same fall. He doesn't know this is possible. Believes he's incorruptible. Trusts in the safeguards. Has faith in the defenses. Because nobody told him they could fail. Because the lesson that could save him is locked in a vault he'll never access. When he falls, not if, when, the same protocol will activate. The same response will occur. He'll be eliminated. Erased. Added to the secret records. Forgotten by history. And the lie will continue. The Grey Knights will remain officially incorruptible. The Imperium will keep believing in its perfect demon hunters. And the cycle will repeat. Because the alternative is confronting a truth the Imperium cannot afford to acknowledge. That perfection is impossible. That safeguards can fail. That even the greatest warriors can be corrupted if given enough time and exposure. Better to maintain the lie. Better to lose a few brothers to preventable falls. Better to sacrifice truth for morale. Better to keep the symbol intact even if the reality is more complicated. That's what occurs when a Grey Knight falls to chaos. He's killed, erased, denied, made to never have existed. Not just to protect the Grey Knights, but to protect the Imperium's faith in itself. To preserve the hope that corruption isn't inevitable. To maintain the belief that someone, somewhere, is absolutely trustworthy. Even if that belief is built on lies. Even if those lies cost lives. Even if the truth is buried in vaults that will never open. Because in the Warhammer 40K universe, some lies are more valuable than any truth. And the Imperium has decided that Grey Knights are incorruptible is one of them. If you made it through all of this, you understand something most people miss about the Imperium. It doesn't just hide its failures from enemies. It hides them from itself. Erases inconvenient truths. builds entire institutional structures around maintaining lies that serve morale better than facts would. The Grey Knight's perfect record isn't proof of incorruptibility. It's proof of effective record-keeping, of institutional denial so thorough that even the people inside the system start believing it. 3 things before you go. First, hit the like button. This kind of deep analysis, examining the cracks in the Imperium's perfect warriors, needs engagement to reach more people. The algorithm doesn't care about depth. It cares about signals. Your like is that signal. Second, leave a comment answering this question. Do you think the Grey Knights are right to hide fallen brothers from history? Or does the denial make the problem worse? I genuinely want to know where you stand on whether institutional lies serve the Imperium or undermine it. Third, subscribe if you want more content that goes beneath the official narrative, that examines what happens when the Imperium's safeguards fail, that asks uncomfortable questions about the organizations everyone else treats as unquestionable. The Grey Knights are humanity's greatest demon hunters, but they're not incorruptible. They're just very good at hiding the evidence when corruption occurs. And sometimes the cover-up is more dangerous than the crime. Thanks for watching. The truth is in a vault on Titan, and it's staying there.